And one question our listeners keep asking you is, I want to start a business, but how do I identify my target market?
Yeah, that's a great question. But let's stop for a second. And first of all, let's start to figure out why. Why do we need a target market instead of a huge market that can guarantee higher odds to be successful? Why should we limit ourselves, right? Let's imagine, for the sake of an example, that our business idea is to produce honey. But since we have limited resources, like almost every startup, we own only one pot of our delicious honey. And we logically think that to be successful, the larger the market, the higher our odds to be successful. And so we start to, let's say, pour water into our honey and dilute the honey so that we can duplicate our honey pots and sell them to a bigger market. But then when we think we will dominate the whole market, we realize that nobody wants our pots of honey because, surprisingly enough, the customers think that they are just pots of dirty water.
Yes.
But it's too late. We just wasted all our available limited resources. Shortly, we failed. One of the main errors and misconceptions that I've seen over and over again is that when we're talking about the market, entrepreneurs, but also intrapreneurs, tend to have a vision of global domination of the market. And they think that the whole market is going to buy their product. That's basically their dream to become rich, because they think again that the bigger is the market, then the higher are the odds to be successful. And stereotypically, when someone is focusing on a huge market, it may sound like our market is worth $10 billion. And if we get 10% of it, but since we're conservative, let's consider only 1%. But even if we get only 1% of it, we will be rich, right? However, this approach of guessing huge numbers with large inaccuracy relies mainly on the hope of being lucky, and it's counterproductive because it doesn't seriously take into account the real-world difficulties, the limited available resources, the real cost of customers acquisition, and so on. That can seriously destroy your business. That's why, to optimize our limited resources and effort, we need to narrow down the market and define very, very well our little tiny segment that we want to start from. Not focusing on a huge market and then crossing our fingers and hoping to be lucky, right? We don't want to build everything for everyone because we think we will hit a bigger market. This would be like trying to sell and push our dirty water on the market and drain all our energy and resources trying to exhaustingly convince customers that it's delicious honey.
Yes.
Instead, to make money, we have to make meaning first. I mean that instead of just providing a small drop of honey diluted into a glass of water that doesn't mean anything to anybody, instead, we have to find a specific group of people that will love our honey so much that they are ready to pay money for honey, even a higher price, to pull out our unique pot of honey from our hands, right? So instead of us spending our efforts and resources in terms of marketing and sales, right, to push our product to a giant market and trying to convince customers to adopt our solution, we want exactly the opposite. We want to benefit from the power of our customers' intrinsic motivation. So we want a tiny but meaningful market segment paying to pull out our product from our hands. To inflame a big market, we need to start our fire first. But to start a fire, we need a little tiny spark. That's why we need to narrow down the market to a little tiny segment that we want to start from. Now, when it's time to define our market segment, right, a common but also the worst case scenario is when our business idea is product driven instead of market driven. With product driven, I mean that our business idea starts with a product or a service in mind, and the epicenter of our innovation is in the supply side, in the solution side of our business model. So basically, we have a technology or a solution in mind, but now we have a solution looking for a problem to solve. And not necessarily there is a customers out there with a problem we think we're going to solve. In this condition, we are at the farthest distance from our market segment because we don't know much about our market segment. And one of the most common errors that also comes from the legacy of traditional marketing is to guess how our market segment will look like. And so we start to create our fancy customers that we imagine targeting, right? We design our personas with attributes, with static adjectives and nouns, with demographics such as the gender, female or male, the geographical area, let's say European, the social status, married, age between 30 and 45, I don't know, with kids and so on. And since I personally clearly belong to this group of people who have all these parameters, does this explain why I should buy or I should not buy your amazing pot of honey? Absolutely not. In fact, now that you know all these parameters about me, are you able to answer, what car do I drive? What mobile phone do I have? Of course, you cannot answer these questions other than just hoping to be lucky enough to guess the right answers. Customers are not demographics. It doesn't work like, if my market segment has all these parameters, then they will buy my product. There is not a causality here. There is not a cause-effect link in this approach, but just a correlation in the attempt to hope that our success will somehow magically come by randomly shooting inside this market segment because we have defined these parameters. Again, good luck.
Yes.
Instead, when defining our market segment, what we need to look for is causality, not correlation. We want to know what our customers inside our market segment have in common that explains the causality chain of their behaviors. Why they are going to buy or not our product, so that after we can more easily replicate our sales, right? Because we understand the behavioral mechanics, the dynamics that move our market, and not just go down the path of big numbers and then pray to be lucky. So a better approach is to start from the other end of the spectrum and be market driven. And here with market driven, I mean that our business idea is inspired by the market, and it's not focused on our amazing product. Instead, we work backward from the real customers to learn about their problems, their struggles, and what kind of emotion they're feeling in a specific context, so that we can eventually come up with an idea to help them to solve their problem with a solution. So here, instead of starting from the solution, the supply side of our business model, we start from the demand side of it. Now, going down to the practical steps, I like to define a market segment as a group of people that have two things in common. First of all, they share the same problem. Let's repeat it again. They share the same problem. This is critically important. The customers inside our market segment now don't necessarily have the same demographic parameters. We don't care. We already saw that these are just, not so useful. Instead, our customers have the same role inside a specific context when they are facing the same problem. And since problems evoke emotions, we want to emotionally connect with our customers and put our feet in their shoes to identify how they feel in that specific context, but also the root cause that triggers this emotion, so that we have our cause-effect link now. And we can understand why our customers behave in that manner in that specific context. So we are not looking for demographics, static nouns, or adjectives. Instead, we are looking for verbs. We're looking for actions. We're looking for behaviors. So we can define our market segment as a group of people who have a role within a specific context. And with a role, I basically mean how our customers would define themselves. So for instance, it's not going to be female from 25 to 40 with a revenue of $100,000 per year. Also, people don't define themselves in that way. So imagine you saying to me, "Hi, I'm Susan. I'm Susan, a female in the 25 to 40 years range," and it would be just awkward, right?
Yes.
Instead, you are more likely going to define yourself, for instance, as a working mom with kids in high school. This is a role. Now, let's imagine a context for this role. For instance, when I have to drive kids to school. So far we have, I'm a working mom with kids in high school, and when I have to drive my kids to school, then the emotion evoked by the problem, I feel frustrated. Why? What is the root cause that triggers this emotion? For example, I feel frustrated because I'm always late at work.
Yes.
Being late at work generates frustration. So to wrap up, we have a role inside a context facing a problem that triggers an emotion. So our market segment can be defined, for instance, as a working mom with kids in high school who are frustrated when they have to drive kids to school because they are always late at work. The second important thing that people inside the same market segment have in common is that they talk to each other. So a working mom with kids in high school, in that specific context, knows other working moms with kids in high school facing the same challenge. And so if you can understand the people inside your market segment and you can get your marketing message circulating inside your market segment, the market segment will circulate the message for you, will work for you, and will help you selling your product for you, leveraging the pull effect. So they are going to pull our product from our hands instead of us trying to push it to the market. So finally, to wrap up, we can define a market segment as a group of people who have in common a role inside a context, and they are facing the same problem that triggers a specific emotion.
That's amazing.